Yes, everyone, welcome back to the Irish Hotspur. And in this video, we're going to be delivering your scout report nice and early for the big Dom Solanke, Dominic Solanke of Bournemouth. Spurs have been needing to sign another striker, and it looks like it could very well be the big Dom with Alejo Feliz out the door on loan to Espanyol and Richarlison potentially headed to the Saudi Pro League. It seems imminent that Spurs should be signing a striker soon, if not Dominic Solanke. And rumors are being reported that it could be for around 55 million euros for the guy, plus add-ons, and no rumor of a swap deal or a player being included on Spurs' side of the deal to make things any cheaper. So this could end up being a big fee for the English striker who will be turning 27 in September this year. And if you can for me, everybody, before we get into the video on my opinions on the player, the stats, all that good stuff, if you can for me, smash that like button if you enjoy these scout reports. And as well, of course, get into those comments. Let me know what you may think of the signing. It hasn't happened yet and it might not happen, but let me know what you think of this rumor and the potential deal of Dominic Solanke going into Spurs and being Ange Postecoglou's new big striker. Now, at the moment, Dominic Solanke is 26 years of age. He's 6 feet 2 inches tall, and he's going to be turning 27 in September of this season. And he did enjoy a very good last season with Bournemouth with an output of 25 goals and assists in all competitions, scoring 19 in the Premier League. He had the third highest non-penalty goal output of any English player, scoring only 2 fewer than Ollie Watkins and Foden with 19 non-penalty goals. And he actually scored more non-penalty goals than this big list here of big-name players. That includes Alexander Isak, Bukayo Saka, Jared Bowen, Cole Palmer, Son Heung-min, our very own Sonny, and Mohamed Salah, as well as plenty more big names that he ended up scoring more non-penalty goals than all those players included in that list. And he also had the most non-penalty goals of any player playing for a club outside of the top 4 of the Premier League last season. And he finished the season with only 3 fewer non-penalty goals than even Erling Haaland, the Viking himself. Now, as we go into the stats, plenty of people would reference his pretty poor Premier League record overall, which I agree is not very attractive. But since his move to Bournemouth, he has had a record of 105 goals and assists and 214 games total, which I don't think is too bad of a record at all. And he gets over 2.5 shots per 90 last year for a lower level Premier League side. And if you combine that with his goal per shot on target ratio of 0.49 per match, that did rank him in the top 20th percentile of any forward in the Premier League last season. A contradiction maybe to those stats on the shots on target percentage and ratio could be the fact that his shot on target percentage is only around 33%. But if I were to give him some sort of slack there, I could argue that if you are the main man for a team like Bournemouth, you might find yourself with chances aren't really as good, and maybe even the service that you get is maybe going to be a bit more inconsistent than what other clubs or maybe what other big name strikers might get for bigger clubs who would have better chances afforded to them on a more consistent basis. So I feel like that low shot on target percentage could technically be explained by the fact that he did play for, let's say, a team that isn't going to be able to create chances on the regular as some other teams might. And then so therefore those shots on target might be explained by their harder chances to finish. Now, if we're going to look at, some of the stats that would reflect Solanke's hold-up play, I think there's a lot of context and explanation that would be needed. He did rank in the bottom 20th percentile for the amount of times that he was dispossessed per match last season in the Premier League compared to any other forward in the Premier League. And I could argue that's an area that maybe he could technically improve on. But by my own seeing eye test, when I watch that team, I think it's hard to be able to hold up the ball consistently when you are a striker that's entirely on your own up top, playing for a club like Bournemouth when you're coming up against a Man City, a Chelsea, a Liverpool, an Aston Villa, and even a Spurs, who were all really top performing teams last year that often would have the ball deep in his team's half, where he's just pretty much entirely up on his own, trying to hold up the ball and get them up the pitch whenever they're just clearing it out of panic, that sort of type of situation. And before you say I'm giving him excuses, which technically I am, he did rank in the top 44th percentile for successful take-ons per match of any forward in the Premier League last year, as well as the top 28th percentile for touches in the opponent's penalty area compared to any other forward in the Premier League last season. And again, those are stats that rank him pretty well in general, but also I think really reflect well on him considering he was a striker for Bournemouth. And another very important area of Solanke's game that I think will really reflect well in this Ange Postecoglou system is his aerial win rate and his aerial ability in general. What I liked about his aerial ability, which I do think is strong, is that Bournemouth pumped a lot of crosses and long balls into Solanke last season, and he still ended up with an aerial win percentage of 41.8%, which actually ranked him in the top 36th percentile of any forward in the Premier League last season. And if you look back at his season and any of the highlights or anything, I think that stat could really hold up with any of the compilations that you might have watched. And also, when it comes to work rate, which is another really important kind of facet or component of what Ange Postecoglou might want in his strikers, on top of the aerial win rate, is the fact that you need to work hard off the ball. You need to be a good presser from the front, and I think Solanke is a good presser. He worked very hard for that Bournemouth team, pressing from the front for Iraiola's system. And I'm disappointed actually that FBref can't reflect my seeing eye test from his hard work rate, because they used to include pressures as well as successful pressures per 90, but for some reason they've taken that away. So I've had to find an alternative stat that could reflect his strong work rate, in that he was able to get actually 28th percentile ranking for created chances from a defensive action. And that sounds like a super nerdy stat, and I think it is. But if you were to try to explain that, basically, it is a chance created from winning a tackle high up the pitch, or a chance created from basically, causing pressure in a team to make a mistake that then leads to a chance. And that would more likely happen, I would say, when you are pressing from the front and you are trying to win the ball back high up the pitch in your opponent's half. So you could argue that for a team like Bournemouth, who often would actually be forced back to their own goal, oftentimes, this is a pretty impressive comparison to other forwards like Holland. You look at, Julian Alvarez, Ollie Watkins, Alexander Isak, all big strikers who played for teams that would more often have the ball in their opponent's half, trying to win it back even when they lose it, compared to maybe a team like Bournemouth, who would find it hard consistently to have, the ball in their opponent's half, or would even find it hard to consistently press the team high up the pitch in their opponent's half. So I could say the fact that he ranked decently well in the 20th percentile for this very nerdy metric does show that there is some really hard work right there. Now let's start comparing Richarlison to Solanke, which I think is a very good player to compare Solanke with, because some people feel like Richarlison's still better than Solanke, and there are plenty of areas in the stats that would reflect that, and there are also some funny ones with Solanke that he's actually better than Richarlison in. And Richarlison had more shots per 90 last season, he had more touches in the attacking penalty area than Solanke last season, and he also had better shot on target percentage than Solanke last season. You could argue that plenty of these stats where he is better than him in terms of maybe the more shots on target percentage, the more shots in general kind of per 90, as well as also the more touches in the attacking penalty area, I'd argue that that could be kind of explained by the fact that he just played in a team that often had the ball in the opponent's half way more often than a team like Bournemouth would, and a team like Spurs did create more chances in general per match than a team like Bournemouth did. So he is going to have, being Richarlison, plenty more opportunities to have touches in the attacking penalty area, to get shots on target, as well as just to get shots off in general. And even the fact that his shots on target percentage is better than Solanke's, I think could be explained by the fact that there are more chances in a Spurs team to get better quality chances to then get your shot on target. Whereas maybe for a team like Bournemouth, whatever chance you get is whatever chance you get, and you're going to have to try to make do with what you have. And you maybe could say that someone like a Richarlison just had better chances presented to him than maybe a Solanke did. One area that I found interesting, though, and this really reflects well on Richarlison, is the fact that Richarlison's finishing has been, I feel like, unfairly criticized, because he has had more goals per shot on target than even Solanke did last year. Richarlison finished 1.4 goals better than his Premier League XG last season of 9.6, which then, if you compare it to his actual goal output of 11, showed that he actually should have scored 1.4 goals fewer than what the XG algorithm had him down for. And I think that's an interesting contradiction to maybe plenty that would argue that Richarlison is a really bad finisher that wastes a lot of chances. Just a funny one to look at in terms of just the stats. But Solanke, strangely enough, finished with more successful take-ons per 90 than Richarlison, and was dispossessed fewer times per match than Richarlison, which makes his hold-up play, I feel like, not look as concerning as it might have done in that previous stat page that we were just breaking down earlier. Richarlison is a guy that I feel like is excellent in the air. I think that's probably his best attribute when it comes to his striking kind of components or his striker abilities. And plenty joked at one point even that he only scores headers for the team if he is ever going to score for the Spurs. And Solanke has actually had more aerials won per match last season, and actually had a higher aerial win rate per match last season than Richarlison. And I'd argue that both then are great in the air, but it's just interesting that Solanke, for a team like Bournemouth, did end up actually with more aerials won per match and a higher aerial win rate percentage than Richarlison, which is really good two stats to combine because you can win plenty of aerials, but it's also what's the percentage, what's the ratio of how many that you're winning, and Solanke ranks pretty well in that regard. My last and final point that I always try to make on stats in general when going through these pages is that stats do not really mean everything. So much context, I think, is required and often goes missing when looking at stats from a distance, which is why any of the times that I do bring up a stat, you can see me trying to find excuses, trying to find context, trying to find, rationale behind those stats because the seeing eye test, I feel like, can be just as valuable, if not more valuable, than the stats at times. But it is also important to use both, in my opinion, because we can only use our seeing eyes, and our seeing eyes often will just lead to an opinion versus an opinion, my seeing eye versus your seeing eye, which is totally fine. That's actually what makes football beautiful in my eyes. But that's why stats can be a great added context to any point or any argument that you are trying to make about a player. Now, speaking of that seeing eye test, here's some attributes that I've seen personally in Solanke's game that I think are both strengths as well as weaknesses. First, we're going to start with the strengths. I definitely feel like his aerial duels are a strength in his game. He's a big guy who can jump, but he can also play with his back to goal when it comes to winning a header or when it comes to just bringing it down. He knows how to back into his opponent to either win the header or to be able to hold the ball up. He has a low accurate finish type of style to his goals scored. He's not the type, I feel like, to score a screamer, to score a banger. He's actually more the type to score that kind of random low shot, which is often, I think, a thing that strikers are actually taught at a very young age. He's very disciplined, I think, in that regard. If you look back at a lot of Solanke's goals, they're very tidy, kind of low accurate finishing type of goals. And I think that's an interesting attribute in his game compared to maybe some strikers like a Jamie Vardy who just absolutely smash it with any opportunity they get. And his work rate off of the ball certainly is another strength of his. He works his tail off, in my opinion, both in a pressing team and also even in a conservative team. And an example of that would be if you ever watched Gary O'Neill's Bournemouth, which I think was a more conservative, maybe counterattacking, defensive type of team compared to Iraola's, you could actually see that his work rate, I think, were both good in Gary O'Neill's style of play, as well as someone like a Vincente Iraola's style of play. So there is something to that it doesn't really matter what system he's in. This guy will work his tail off for his manager pressing from the front. And physicality certainly is another big element of his game. He's not the type to get bullied. He's not the type to really be afraid of a physical challenge or a physical battle. And another key attribute as well is I think his movement as well as his anticipation. He does know how to score a scrappy goal. He'll kind of anticipate where the ball is going to deflect. If it's a cross into the box and then all of a sudden kind of, jiggles around or jumbles around in the penalty area. I can't think of the right word there. He can find his feet onto it and then just sort of put it away quite quickly and quite randomly. And I think that's a good attribute, as a striker. He's not just scoring clean goals where he's being put in behind and then ends up scoring. He's actually able to score some of those scrappier poacher type goals in the penalty area. And he knows how to move to dangerous areas when things are a bit stagnant in the box. He knows how to move his way around, doesn't get pushed around or bullied in the penalty area. So I definitely say his movement as well as his anticipation are one of his better strengths in his game. And he does know how to make runs in behind. Don't forget this. I feel like he has actually that sort of quick burst of acceleration when either getting turned past his marker or just in general after he gets rid of the ball and passes it off to a winger. He has that quick burst of acceleration for such a big guy and can make those runs in behind to stretch the defense as well. Now, if I were to find any weaknesses in his game, this is an area that I wish maybe people could help me out in because I'm a bit biased towards Dominic Solanke. I think he probably has some areas he could improve on when it comes to his left foot or his weak foot finishing. I just don't remember too many goals that I've seen of his that he scored with his left foot in general, but I could be wrong on that. And also, I'd say his passing range might be one of them where he's not really going to be like an Ivan Toney or a Harry Kane type of a striker. There are very few like them really in the world in general, let's be honest. But he doesn't exactly have that sort of ability to always spray a pass out of nowhere, have that sort of number 10 like number 9 kind of combination style. He is definitely more of a traditional number 9 and will find a pass, if he needs to and when he gets turned, and isn't exactly, a guy with no vision whatsoever, but I wouldn't say that he has that spraying like passing ability like Harry Kane did for us, or even like an Ivan Toney does for a club like Bournemouth. And also, I would argue, how clinical is he? Richarlison, right, finished with a higher with a higher goal output compared to his xG, right? It was 1.4 better than his xG. Whereas with Solanke, he scored 17 goals last season, 17 non-penalty goals, should I say, last season in the Premier League. But his xG, his non-penalty xG, had him down for 17.2. So you could argue that maybe there were some bad misses here and there during that season for Bournemouth. So those are the couple of weaknesses, or the few weaknesses that I could come up with Solanke. But please let me know any that you have found in his game in those comments below, please. Now, my overall conclusion and thoughts on the player: I like Solanke. I liked him a lot actually last season. I also liked him under Gary O'Neill as well. I think I've kind of noticed a difference in his attitude as well as just his overall ability since being labeled that long time, and probably deservedly long time, labeled Chelsea and Liverpool reject. And I feel like he's rejuvenated his career. He looks like a far more motivated and concentrated player and focused player, should I say, than maybe he did in the past. I was even delusionally saying, this is how much I kind of like him. I was even delusionally saying at one point last year, very early in the season last year, that I actually would not have minded him coming to Spurs this summer. And it's just crazy to see that this rumor could end up coming true, considering the fact that I was annoying Dave so much when we were doing our fantasy updates about how much I was liking the looks of Solanke last season. And he also suits a team that I feel like crosses a lot. And we are a team that crosses a lot in Ange Postecoglou's system. And I feel like the type of striker that he is depends on that type of service. Balls into the penalty area, crosses into the box, and he knows how to get onto them. And he also has the hold-up play, I think, to be able to handle that type of service. Bournemouth, in fact, were 6th in the league last year, 4 crosses into the penalty area, and Spurs were actually just one behind Spurs were just one behind Bournemouth in that metric. So he's actually going to be going into a similar team for the type of chances that we, create, like Bournemouth did. So I think that's a good transition for Dominic Solanke if he is going to go to a club like ours. And of course, another area of Solanke's game that I do like a lot is the fact that he is good in the air. Only Calvert-Lewin, Carlton Morris, and Ollie McBurney won more headers than him last year in the Premier League, and they all played in what I would argue are get it launched type of teams, right? They are the specialists, in fact, in the sort of get it launched type of style of striker department. And Dominic Solanke compared quite favorably to them. He was 4th in line behind them for any forward for winning the most headers last year in the Premier League. And he worked so hard off the ball as well. In fact, I think he worked harder than some of the other strikers we'd been rumored with, like an Ivan Toney, for example. And I think that's an important attribute, maybe a less sexy attribute, but a more important attribute than maybe some people might get it credit for in an Ange Postecoglou's system as the striker for his team. And speaking of Ivan Toney, while I accept that a lot of people would have preferred Ivan Toney, and to be honest, I would have also liked to have Ivan Toney as well, it is interesting to point out that Dominic Solanke's best season in the championship for Bournemouth, he only had 5 fewer goals and assists than Ivan Toney's record-breaking championship season for Brentford. And Ivan Toney's best season in the Premier League as well was a record of 20 goals and 4 assists. That's actually only 2 more goals and assists than Solanke scored last season in the Premier League. So while Ivan Toney seems to be very favorably preferred by a lot of this fan base instead of a Dominic Solanke, the fact that I think Ivan Toney's 2 best ever seasons for Brentford, Dominic Solanke did not rank or did not fall too far behind in the goal and assist output than him, which is just an interesting point, I think, to make. And he looks inspired. He looks motivated, like I mentioned before. Since I think Gary O'Neill took over from Scott Parker, I started to see a difference in Dominic Solanke's game, and I think he suits Ange's style of play in a lot of ways. And it's also important to note as well that he isn't injury prone, which is definitely a thing that really hurt Spurs last season and really hurt, I think, Richarlison's reputation and time here as a Spur, and probably even with Ange Postecoglou, hence why he might even be getting sold. Well, everyone, that about does it. That's my scout report on Dominic Solanke. I am very biased, very delusional when it comes to the guy. He's someone who I just kind of had a bit of a soft spot for last season and even during his time with Gary O'Neill at Bournemouth. And I can understand why plenty of people might not like him. He's only really coming into his own in the last season or maybe season and a half, if I'm being generous. Yes, he had a good championship season, but based on the Premier League, there's only so much evidence that we have to work with. There's plenty of evidence to suggest from when he was a lot younger that he isn't good enough for a club like Spurs, but I happen to have a big soft spot for the guy. I think he'll do very well in the Sanj Postecoglou system, and I think he could really solve a lot of the problems that we had in the striker position last season. But let me know, everybody, if you can for me, smash that like button, please. A lot of work goes into making these scout reports, and also, please, everybody, get in the comments if you feel like you disagree with me at any point. I'm not going to be offended by it, and also, as well, let me know if you feel like I missed anything, or if you even agreed with me at any point, or you took anything away from this video. But I'll leave you there, everybody. Come on, you Spurs. In the big Ange we trust. And potentially, welcome to Tottenham Hotspur, Dominic Solanke.